welcome to the 2012-2013 season of Primetime at PU Library. Primetime is a year-long celebration of the academic and experiential accomplishments of our faculty, students, and staff, and is a collaboration between the Friends of the BU Library and many offices on campus. Join us after Thanksgiving on Thursday, November 29th, as Erica Leonard of the Multilingual Task Force presents a Talk About Teaching sessions entitled Multilingual Students, Clarity in Assignments and Tests. She will present strategies to help multilingual students succeed by giving a better understanding of academic language from the perspective of a non-native speaker, giving a starting point for evaluating class assignments and tests for clarity and suggestions for encouraging multilinguals to seek help for their tuition. Today, Taylor Rafferty will share about her study abroad experience and ripples and reflections in Cambodia.
That means hello, how are you? And you would respond, "Soksavai." Very good, I'm glad you're all well. I just want to kind of forewarn you, issues in this talk are going to be really emotional and moving, so please let yourself feel the brokenness. These are real stories and real people, and so that's my hope, and I want you to feel brokenness with that hope we have in Christ. So I'm going to start off with a little bit about the history of Cambodia, which I think is really important to think about, given that a lot of the injustices like sex trafficking and poverty are perpetuated because of this genocide that happened there. And so my first slide, this is S21 Prison Center, and we got the chance to kind of tour through there, and so I'll be explaining a little more about that center in a little bit. But the Khmer Rouge was, or the Democratic Kampuchea, took full control in Cambodia in April of 1975. And the whole purpose behind the movement and unspeakable cruelty was to transform Cambodia into a classless rural society in which there were no rich people, no poor people, and no exploitation. And so the people of Cambodia were divided into two subsets: the old liberated people and the new liberated people. And essentially what that meant was that the old liberated people who had lived, were those who had lived previously in rural areas, controlled by the Khmer Rouge before April of 1975. And the new people consisted of those who were evacuated from their cities in April of 1975 and were consequently classified as parasites. And another really tragic thing that happened during this time was that marriages were not at all intended for a love relationship or a familial union, but were established to produce children, to serve the revolution. And so husbands and wives many times did not know each other, and they were permitted to see each other every 7 to 10 days, but the rest of the time was to be spent working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, and without sufficient food or rest. And the security system was a definite way of infusing fear into the Khmer people. And these prisons were known for detention, interrogation, torture, and execution. And indisputably the most infamous torture center was S21, which had previously served as Tulsa High School. The torture committed there, I would argue, is one of the most graphic and gruesome of humanities in humanity. Prisoners were beaten, lashed with wire, given electric shocks, burned with cigarettes, forced to eat human waste, held underwater, and sexually abused in just horrific ways. And these were all used to generate confessions that were often untrue because their victims were innocent. And so we have an innocent Khmer person who is trying to say something that would alleviate the torture. And so the confessions they had to make for lives. So we were able to actually meet one of the 4 survivors of this prison center. So this is our class with him, and many of these people have written books about their experiences, or one who just recently passed away had a whole murals of the different types of torture that were used in that center and are now dedicated there, and so you can get a little bit of a depiction of what it was like. So we were able to walk through agonizing killing fields while we were there, and this is just one tree called the magic tree, and the tree was used as a tool to hang a loudspeaker, which made sounds while the moans of victims, while they were being executed. And there were trees specifically dedicated to children and infants who would be smashed against them as well. And so countless new people, the Khmer Republic officials, ethnic or religious minority groups, and intellectuals, so anyone with an education, anyone who had a given profession like a teacher or a doctor were just killed off. And their deaths were carried out using a variety of different methods. Forced to kneel down in these killing fields, they would receive a blow to the head with a shovel, hoe, or stick. Some were even suffocated using plastic bags. And it was often the case that families were killed together, because the Khmer Rouge held to this deeply ingrained aphorism in their culture that said to dig up the grass, one has to remove even the roots. So finally, there was hope on January 7th of 1979, and this nightmare came to a close for the Khmer Rouge regime was overthrown by 150,000 Vietnamese troops who had taken refuge in Vietnam and were able to combat the 15,000, the 150,000 Vietnamese troops with 15,000 anti-Khmer Rouge Cambodian soldiers were able to overthrow the Khmer Rouge. And one of the things that really struck me while I was walking through these fields is thinking about the eternities of 3 million people in Cambodia. And I mean, I don't know, I'm not Jesus, but I have to just believe that in some of these last moments he was calling people to himself, that it wasn't too late. And I think a lot of injustice that was perpetuated as a result of this was because of the Buddhist belief in karma. And karma, I'm sure many of you know what that is, but it is the force generated by one's actions, which determines the person's next existence. So victims of these atrocities were taught that vindictiveness is not ended by being vindictive. And those were the very words of Buddha himself. And so I think a lot of these victims just hid behind curtains of shame and silence because bringing the Khmer issue to light was just far too painful and wrought with a lot of persecution that continued. And karma keeps many enslaved to injustice and exploitation as a result, even to this day. And these circumstances are really perfect soil for helplessness, hopelessness, pessimism, and even fatalism to take root and grow. Buddhist communities may cease to even engage in the active process of fighting injustice, because after all, that person who is afflicted with whatever injustice deserves it. And this holds such severe consequences for the little girl who's shackled to the chains of sex slavery. So I'm going to talk a little bit about prostitution and sex trafficking in the Cambodian society. I am by no means an expert, but But I would just like to share a few stories. I think it was the third day that we were there, a group of us went out to a restaurant, and I was just entirely naive of what was going on. And towards the end, when we were getting our bill, I just happened to look to the back rooms, and there were curtains of women who were prostituting themselves, and on the next level were day beds where women were waiting for their next perpetrator. And so that was just a very, very anxiety-invoking experience. And to know that it's just a very live reality. It's not uncommon to go to massage parlors or restaurants and just to see it live in action. And we ended up going to a documentary within the first week of being there. And I honestly do not remember much of many other stories. But I can say I remember a little girl who was 10 who was talking about her experience of being raped in a field by 50 different men. And she had a stroke because her little body couldn't continue. And I can't really give words to why these things happen. Obviously, I just remember riding back in the tuk-tuk with Laura Linner. Maybe some of you know her. She was a social work major. And I think graduated 2 years ago already. And I will never forget the prayer she mustered while we were on our way back to the hotel. And she just said, "Jesus, teach us how to weep next to you." And so not to change subjects too entirely, but I do want to give some of the definition of what the TIP report says about sex trafficking. The TIP is trafficking in persons. So it includes the act, the means, and the purpose, and all must be present in order to kind of diagnose that it is a sex trafficking incident. So the act involves the recruitment, transportation, transfer, or receipt of persons. The means contain any kind of threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of the giving or receiving of payment or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person. And it is always for the purpose of exploitation. And so just having thought about the different push and pull factors that kind of push a little girl or boy into the sex trade or pull them into it, and how it's different than the United States was just a very, I think, enriching thing to think about. And I know in the United States, I don't know how much you know about how it goes on here, but a lot of times children, I think, between the ages of 12 and 14 is most common, and they're oftentimes runaways, and they'll be approached within like the first 48 hours of having run away by a pimp. And then in Cambodia, the push and pull factors are entirely different because a lot of it pertains to poverty. And so you have push factors, which are like gender. Obviously, I don't want to negate that little boys are trafficked because they are, but it is much more common for a little girl to be trafficked. Ethnic minorities, so we worked with a lot of Vietnamese children who had been trafficked across the border into Cambodia, and they are considered an ethnic minority there. Childhood sexual abuse, physical or mental disability, and poverty, like I said before, or any lack of education or work. And then the specific pull factors that contribute to the commercial sex trade is media promotion and legalization of prostitution, new technology, the pervasiveness of adult sex markets, and prevalence of traffickers and pimps, corrupt police officials, and sex tourists. So what was fascinating to me was to think about just how it looks different. I went to India this past summer, and we spoke to a lot of women who would give birth to a baby girl, and they would just be weeping. And it was more of a funeral if you were to give birth to a girl, because they're so devalued there. In Cambodia, that's not exactly the case. So if a baby girl is born, families will just often rejoice, because if there's any kind of setback in finances, they have someone who can bring in funds at as early as 4 and 5 years old. So there is hope, and we went to Agape Restoration Center. I did not take this picture because we were not allowed to take pictures of the children, but just to see them dance was a miracle. And so they danced for us in their traditional wear, and they have really fancy hand gestures with their traditional dances. We shared a meal together. We toasted with our energy drinks together. We played volleyball with them, beaded necklaces, face painted. This is a picture of my friend Cassie and I with love written all over us. We were incredibly goofy and just sang music together in both Khmer and English. And it was just like so struck me to think about the voice of freedom, and I really think that the screams and laughter of these girls was the voice of freedom, because they had been shunned into silence months or years earlier. And one story that was particularly profound to me was of a girl who was sold into a brothel at the age of 8, and her father was actually the security guard of that brothel. And so he witnessed her being raped repeatedly over and over again. And now that these brothels, there's 7 of them that have been converted into churches and counseling centers and vocational centers and schools. And she is 16. She was 16 in January, so she's probably 17 now. And her dad is still in jail, and she is leading worship at that church every Sunday that used to be her brothel. So it's an incredible story of redemption that the Lord has worked out of that. And I won't lie, before I came, and especially working with these girls, I had this just false sense that they must be delighted. They must be full of gratitude that they were rescued. And that is not the case at all in any instance. And they are severely depressed, suicidal, oftentimes addicted to drugs, or infected with AIDS, resistant, rebellious, mistrusting, disengaged, panicked, you name it. And I think the hardest one for me to realize was that they're highly sexualized. So many times, like, sexual abuse will just happen within those homes between the girls, because they're so normalized to that kind of living. And we also worked with an organization called Chabdai, which meant holding hands in the Khmer language. And it was just a beautiful networking of vision that combines this type of aftercare that I was telling you about with prevention, intervention, reintegration in society, and the social responsibility of various business projects or lay people, and what people like us can be doing. And any agency we worked with, a whole host of them. I know in the National Justice Mission, Chabdai, Agape, Daughters of Cambodia, and Hagar International, all attended to the root cause, which was poverty. And that's how sex trafficking is just being perpetuated there. So I did not take this picture, so I don't want you to think I would never do this to a person. But I really wanted to give you a fair representation of what we saw every day when we went out on the streets. And you don't have to walk too far at all to see poverty, whether it was the mother with her son laying on the ground, or children piecing through piles of trash looking for something to eat. There was a lot of child beggars, so you'd have children crawling up on your laps when you were in the tuk-tuk, just extending their little hand to you to beg. And also just a variety of different, jewelry or illegally printed documents. And I ended up buying one by accident because I didn't know who was behind these children. And so I think a lot of times, I don't want to overgeneralize by any means, but for me especially, I tend to think of poverty in only material terms. And so being a well-intentioned tourist, I wanted to, think about how do we provide for those that beg to us, and what would Jesus have done? And I don't think he would ignore them or just completely breeze by without looking. And we ended up reading a really fascinating work by Steve Corbett and Brian Fickert. It's called When Helping Hurts. I'm not sure if many of you know that book. But they say in this, poor people typically talk in terms of shame, inferiority, powerlessness, humiliation, fear, hopelessness, depression, social isolation, and voicelessness. And so poverty is far more emotional and relational than I had ever considered before. And they talk about 4 different types of poverty. Poverty of spiritual intimacy, so poverty of not knowing Christ, which is largely the case in Asia. Poverty of being, so not having worth and dignity because they're missing a relationship with Christ. Poverty of community, so not having those that are reaching out to them on the street. And poverty of stewardship. So that's the one that we think generally when we see poor places. So I know a lot of my own grappling with things when I got back from Cambodia was out of a place of guilt, and I would just look into my closet every day and almost start bawling because I had just so many clothes and so much stuff, and so this was really helpful for me to think about the different kinds of poverty, and that poverty is just not material, and there is poverty here at Bethel. And I was gifted with a position of serving as an RE last year, so I hope that in some way I was able to speak into the shame of 26 girls that I mentored and really call forth their worth in Christ. So now I'm going to move on to a kind of fun story. This is a sea urchin. And I was stung by a sea urchin. And I think 8 of those drilled into my foot when we were in Scenicville for the last part of our trip. And I really learned a valuable lesson through this, which I was not expecting. And so when this happened, I was carried to the boat. I was screaming and given tramadol right away. And our tour guide, who's just this outrageous Australian man, brought out this yay big metal rod and said, this is the only way that we can shatter the barbs in your foot. And so he proceeded 30 or 40 times to just whack my foot and to try to shatter the barbs. And so that was even more painful than the initial shock of getting stung, and it did not work. So I ended up coming back to the United States and was unable to run for 2 or 3 weeks. Had gone to 3 different clinics, and no one knew what to do about a sea urchin puncture wound. So I finally went to a podiatrist, and she told me, we can't give you Novocaine, it would be far too painful to insert Novocaine because this area of your foot is just so tender. And so she proceeded to just cut open my foot and take the barbs out that way. And so, nevertheless, I learned a very valuable lesson on how God entrusts pain to us. And I think a lot of times He will entrust more pain, more tears, because He knows it's going to heal the grief that was before. And Anne Lamott says it this way in her book called Traveling Mercies. All those years I fell for the great palace lie that grief should be gotten over as quickly as possible and as privately. But what I've discovered since is that the lifelong fear of grief keeps us in a barren, isolated place, and that only grieving can heal grief. The passage of time will lessen the acuteness, but time alone, without the direct experience of grief, will not heal it. And so this is my last slide, and I want to share a story that was just very impactful. While I was in Cambodia, I think this was 2 weeks in, I ended up going to Bloom Cafe, which if you ever go to Cambodia, check it out because it is just a beautiful ministry where women who've been rescued from sex slavery are able to go to make cupcakes and have their own little business initiative with that. And of course, because the girls were with me, we got lost. And so we're walking by this kind of outdoor, like, I don't even know what you call it, an outdoor sales venue thing. And there was just different candy and whatever. And the girls seemed to be really like taken aback by it and just were looking and browsing. And I was kind of walking from behind. And I saw this little girl who was seated to the back of the store, and she had just this rag in her mouth, clenching her teeth, screaming, tears running down her face. And she was bleeding all over her arms. And her mom was just scraping these wounds. And then when she would cry, she would be hit because thanks to Josh Manfred, who explained this to me, that is a way of keeping tears because it's just very shameful if you're to cry in public in Cambodia. So from my perspective as an American, I'm thinking, man, this is child abuse. And it still was very painful to think back to and realize that this little girl is so in pain and she's bleeding and crying and her mom is just hitting her 2, 3, 4 times. And in that moment, there was nothing I could have done. Like I don't speak the Khmer language. The security is the 5th most corrupt in the world, so I wouldn't trust a police officer with this because people buy their way out of injustice all the time. And yeah, so I was just so shell-shocked by the entire thing. And I remember not even being able to talk about it for a week. And we were on our way to Scenicville, and I'm just passing by all of this poverty. And the only thing I can utter in my trembling is just like, Jesus, are you here? Do you see this? And it was just, in my heart, I knew in this moment, she is the reason I came. And I think, I know that those were words that he spoke to me. And it was just very, very powerful. So he came for her. He came to heal her wounds with his, and mend everything that had been battered and broken and bruised in her life. And did so by becoming unequally wounded and weakened for us. And because of it, we're saved. We're purified. We are new. And I'm really, looking back, I really feel honored that I was able to see the suffering image of my God that day. And so post-Cambodia, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. I know a number of you knew me then, and thank you for taking me as I was. I definitely returned not knowing what to make of the experience. The transition was just awful. It was a huge bumpy landing that I was not expecting. And every day just felt underwater. It was a very slow and blurry and painful season. And the question that so often lingered in my heart was, how am I supposed to reconcile this brokenness in Cambodia with the goodness and holiness of God. And the whole time, I thought, this is my job. I'm going to have to reconcile this. Like, I'm going to have to figure this out. And Jesus did that. The cross is the purest display of that reconciliation, where all of the evil, all of the sin, all of the suffering and pain just collided with passion and justice and holiness and mercy of God. And so thinking back now and thinking about the high priest that intercedes for us and that sympathizes with us, I just have to look in Gethsemane and see that Jesus sweat blood for us, and there is nowhere near, like physiologically, when our bodies are under that much stress, we sweat blood, and he did that for us. And so I know that, yes, I thought I was entrusted with a big burden for the nation of Cambodia, but it was nothing in comparison to what he took on. And I know at the same time that he didn't minimize the brokenness I had, that he was holding me on the floor through every breakdown, and that he was just whispering to me really sweet words of comfort during that time. And so I really felt, I'm not sure, I've never had like a Job-like experience. I can't imagine being just ripped away from family and everything, material possessions, everything. But I know that how Job sat in his pain is far different than we sit in ours and we sit in other people's. Because Job is constantly asking, if only I had someone to intercede for me, if only I had a mediator. And he's talking about Christ. And we live post-resurrection, so we have that hope. And I guess the sweetest thing to keep reminding myself through all of this is that Satan has lost. I have to tell him, Satan, you've lost. Like, yes, the brothels are full. Yes, bad things happen. There's a lot of abuse and this horrific sin that goes on. And Satan has lost, and love will win. And so that's the hope that I hope you guys can take away with you. And just thank you for this time. Are there any questions that you have for me? Yeah.
How have you found that your time in Cambodia and India and Nepal have shaped what you plan to do after you graduate?
Well, if the finances were available, I know I would be moving out to California in a heartbeat. They have a program at Fuller Seminary, an intercultural studies program that has an emphasis with children at risk. So combining really missions and preventative work of sex and labor trafficking with children. And I would much rather work on the preventative side of things because I don't think I would be a great therapist. I just think I would be sitting there crying. So probably not the most helpful.
And what's wrong with that?
When you're a therapist?
Crying all the time.
Yeah, true. So I would much rather be working on the preventative side of things because I know, especially in Cambodia, that seems to be missing. And that then less aftercare would be needed. But I don't really know what that looks like. I'm planning on staying in the cities to just save up for that. But long term, I would like to be working with children at risk. Yeah.
What made you decide to go on the Cambodia trip in the first place?
All right. Well, I had been out of the country before, so I know that was a motivating factor. I kind of proved myself that I didn't fall apart when I was in Spain. I could be away from Bethel and the community, and though I love them dearly. And I think I really wanted to know. I've been fascinated with missions since I was 10 years old, so I really wanted something that was going to be more intentional about dialoguing about poverty and injustice. And I really knew nothing of sex trafficking before I went at all. And it just ripped my heart open wide. And so, yeah, I kind of made the decision just very impulsively. That's kind of how I make all my decisions. And just decided that it was right. I was an RA, and so I knew that none of the other RAs were going to be studying abroad during that time, so that kind of freed up things for me, and just went from there. But when I got back, I really needed something redeeming. I needed something where it's more intentional in community and worshiping together and praying together. Cambodia by no means was a mission trip in that sense. We were there to be educated, so it just looked differently, obviously, because of the study abroad office. So, yeah, so then I went to India and healed.
Taylor, do you have any advice for the group that's going this region?
Yeah, wow. Well, I think just to let yourself feel, it's going to be really heartbreaking. And I remember going back many nights with my roommates, and we didn't know each other. And so we would just sit there bawling separately and trying to say some sort of comforting words. And so let yourself feel, like honor the suffering that comes, and know that you are becoming more like Christ in it, and it is an honor to participate in his sufferings. And keeping in mind, I think the thing with me is that I just had this huge savior complex. Like, I need to save the nation of Cambodia, and I need to rescue all these girls from sex trafficking, and I'm one person, and that's God's job. And once I realized that it's more participatory in where he's already working, it's not a matter of calling God to the nation of Cambodia or calling God to India. He's there and working well, and we get to just participate in prayer and intercede the best we can as humans, but knowing that we have a God who fights for us. So that's definitely good to keep in mind, that you're not savior. You're not savior of these women who've been abused, not savior of the poverty in the nation. And then I took on a whole thing like, this poverty, I must be doing something about this poverty. And poverty has been perpetuated because of karma, and they're not able to kill rice that destroy their fields, mice that destroy their rice fields, and not able to kill cows that can be used to feed their people. So that's not my fault. That was already there before I got there. And so just keeping in mind that God doesn't shame us with that. He entrusts us to see brokenness, but not to claim it as our own. I hope that helps a little bit. Does anyone else have any questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for this time.